Hello, everyone. I'm Ahmed Ali Akbar. I will be the moderator for this session. If you see me on my phone, it's because I have my notes on here, so my apologies. I'm not checking my text or anything. I am a podcast host and journalist. I host See Something, Say Something, which covers American Muslims. But also as a journalist, I'm very interested in how South Asian food is written about in American media. And I've done some writing and hosting about that. So I'm really excited to be with this panel of eminent cookbook authors and writers, and to have a conversation about food. So I'm going to introduce our panel. I'm not going to do too much talking. I'm joined by Madhur Jaffrey. She's an actress, food and travel writer, and the author of the James Beard Foundation Hall of Fame cookbook, An Invitation to Indian Cooking, and also now a little bit of a rap star. Is that correct? I think we have the video. If we could put on the Mr. Cardamom video so we can get
a
little bit of a taste.
My name is Praveen. No. Hello, everyone.
Pound and a half of chicken.
Stir and fry it again.
Mom? You're living in our house now, Mom. We're not living in yours. Why do I have to keep telling you this? And then on Wednesday, you forget to pick up Nikhil from school. All of your meddling and these questions and the TV serials cause you to lose sight of the fact that you are not a good nanny.
The best damn nanny that you ever done seen. Fuck top 5 nannies and fuck top 3. I'm the number 1 nanny, don't fuck with me. Fuck any of the nannies, since they better than Praveen. Cause I'm 85 years old, 85 years old, 85 years with my family on my back, so I'll outlast everybody on my fucking haters. Don't know me now, then you never know me later. Say, I be in an elevator to the top, go and find your own way there. Drinking a little water ball for me by my way there. Not just anyone, but the head fucking major. At the top, where it bees. Got a great grandkid, man, fucking ace. Wrapped in a shawl just in case a cool breeze. But you never catch me, better just catch Sace.
One of my happiest moments of all time was watching that video. Incredible video. I'm also joined by Sumayya Usmani. She's also an author of 2 cookbooks, Summers Under the Tamarind Tree and Mountain Berries and Desert Spice, excuse me. She also has a video that she's brought to share with us. If we could put that on as well, that would be great.
It's on a rap video.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. That would be a great mixtape, though.
Every time I cook a recipe that I grew up with, the minute a spice hits the oil, I smell the flavor of home. When I moved to the UK 10 years ago, I realized that not many people knew the individuality and the distinct flavor of Pakistan, which is the reason that led to writing my book, Summers Under the Tamarind Tree. My greatest connection with food is having watched my mum from a very young age cooking. And to this day, my mother says, how do you know how to cook? I never taught you anything, but I just learned by watching her, by the senses of hearing and tasting and smelling different aromas and tastes. The borders of Pakistan have influenced the food in Pakistan. The cuisine has been influenced greatly by invasions, by migration. There's such a wealth of history behind each recipe. And the most important thing is that though Pakistan's a really young country, it is a cuisine that's been in the making for centuries. One of the most important factors of cooking in Pakistan is that we use our senses to cook, and we use estimation to cook, which we in Urdu call andaza. And that's something that I write about in my book as well, that the cooking with your senses, cooking with feeling, hearing, smelling aromas is so much easier and less intimidating than having to follow a recipe completely by every single letter. This book was a labor of love. And as I give it to you as a gift from my country, from my kitchen to you, I hope that it opens up a whole new world of flavor, a whole new culture that's not always been understood, maybe misunderstood. I hope that it creates an understanding that in Pakistan, food is everything. It's our passion, it's what we live for. As the culture of Pakistan is about sharing food, I'm sharing my food with you.
Welcome, Sumayya.
Thank you.
And finally, we're joined by Sameen Rushdie, who is the author of Indian Cookery. Sorry, I was pause on that one. Can you tell me a little bit about that story of Indian cookery? It's a really interesting story, how it's come back to the U.S. print.
It's interesting that it's come to America now. At the time when I wrote it because the food that when I came to England, I came in the 80s, and nothing that I saw or recognized was the food of home. Nothing tasted like what we were used to. I was angry by the curry houses that you ate out in. There weren't ready meals at the time. There weren't that many takeaways. And I just wanted to write. It was a personal book. It was the book that was of my life and the food in my house and the food that I traveled with. And at the time, I thought it was important because food, like language, kind of makes up the culture and the identity of who we are. And I had children at the time that didn't, but there were children growing up. There's a whole diaspora of children who were eating this awful stuff, which was called Indian food. That was one thing. And since then, so many Pakistani friends, because Pakistan was a place that I went to when I was 17. And I was there for about... And in terms of life, it wasn't that long, but it was an important part of my life, and a lot of my really good friends are there, and they say that this is Pakistani food. And I want to explore that notion of it. Is there an Indian or Pakistani food? It's a subcontinent it's so huge. And then Pakistan and Muslims like to own the Mughals as their own, but so much of North Indian food also derives from that. And the Mughals were influenced by where they were. They didn't serve up Persian food. They served up food with Indian spices. So it was all about all those things that were important to me.
Right.
At the time. And it's good that it's coming out in America now, I think, because people are ready to explore that food. It used to be very unusual for anyone other than Indians to cook Indian food at home, or Pakistani food, or whatever. I think that's opening up a little bit more.
Right, and it's such an amazing collection of Rushdie family recipes. I think of it as like the Rushdie family cookbook. It really captures that, and it's a wonderful achievement. As someone who's written a lot about South Asian food on the internet, that's really been my sort of thing that I've done. I still see that, despite the fact that I have taken a lot of inspiration from all of your writing and how you have translated successfully, the foods of our home and the foods of our cultures to people, that there's still a lot of sort of misunderstanding. There's words like chai tea and naan bread, and even Madhur wrote in the 70s about curry and how simplified of a word it is. And in some ways, we've learned more, like the American public and maybe the UK public as well has learned more, but I think there's still some work to do. So I wanted to know, what was your vision when you were writing your books? How did you translate our food into a cookbook? Madhur, would you like to start?
The very first cookbook I did was called An Invitation to Indian Cooking. I didn't pick the title, my editor did. I didn't know what to call it. I wanted to call it Curry, Myth and Reality. And my editor said it's going to be filed in the philosophy section and no one will buy it. So I said, okay, you pick the title. My whole idea was I was going around America. People didn't know Indian food, and what they knew of Indian food. Now I'm talking about the 60s, the late 60s. I'm really old. Older than Salima Hashmi, let me tell you. So in the 1960s, there were 2 or 3 horrible Indian restaurants, and they were like the British, high street curry houses where you went to drink basically lager, beer, and you washed your beer down with something spicy and hot. You hardly knew what it was. It was sort of brownish.
It didn't matter.
Yeah, it didn't matter. It was brownish and vaguely spicy. And you just had the two together and you went home drunk and happy. So that was what we all knew.
But Madhur, we conformed with that. It was our people that were producing that stuff.
Right.
They came.
You see, the food was basically North Indian, Punjabi. But the people who were cooking it were Bengali.
From Sylhet.
Yes, from Sylhet. From Sylhet. And
still are.
Jump shape or whatever, and they were cooking none of their lovely fish. Nothing like that. None of the Bengali, wonderful Bengali dishes. They were cooking this North Indian stuff, which they hardly cared for, hardly ate themselves. And it became a sort of sequence of hot, hotter, hottest. And that is what in Britain the food is. I remember going to, I was writing a book called The Curry Nation. This was much later. And I went to, they said Thursdays is curry day in every bar, in every pub in England. So I said, I'll go on one of these curry days and talk to people, interview people. First I looked at the menu. So it went from the hottest, it was like Madras, as they say, Madras curry and which is the one, Vindaloo, yeah, Vindaloo, I'm getting old. So there's Vindaloo, and so it came down to korma, which was supposedly the mildest. And we all know korma can be spicy and hot, but anyway, in England this was the sort of grading that people understood. So I was talking to various people, interviewing various people, and there was a boy, a young, like 14-year-old boy on the cusp, sort of. And I said, what are you eating? What have you chosen to eat? And he said, I used to eat korma, but now I've graduated to Vindaloo. He's very proud that he can do it. And it's that kind of food I hate it. I just hate it. And I was at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art studying acting. And I would go up to the 5th floor where the canteen was and eat this roast beef that looked grey and this potatoes and cabbage that had been cooked for 2 days. And I said, no, I can't do this. And there was no good food to be had. So I wrote letters to my mother to say, please teach me how to cook. And she wrote 3-line letters. And as you were saying, it's a matter of andaz and memory. So I remembered what we'd eaten at home, and her 3-line recipes and my andaz and my memory helped me to recreate the dishes. And so it went. I mean, I don't want to take all the time, but I mean, you say your experience.
I mean, it's exactly the same. I think, people say how, something you said, Sameen, is that, India, Pakistan is such a big subcontinent. The food is so diverse in every section of the country.
Yeah.
And for me, I mean, I grew up as a first-generation Pakistani because I was born in, obviously, post-1947. And my parents had migrated from India. So, of course, the food I grew up was just food, and I just knew it as Pakistani food. And it was very influenced by different parts of the country, I would say, by friends, by family, intermarrying, people from Peshawar or somebody from Lahore got married in the family, and we all sort of cook food that was borrowed from each other. And so I would say that I sort of saw the development of the contemporary Pakistani cuisine, which is a real confluence of all the flavors of the borders, of the migrants, everything. And so when I moved to Britain, of course, much later, I was in my 30s when I moved to Britain. I'm giving away my age here. And I've been in Britain for about 15 years now. And I have to say that I was, like a good little girl, a Pakistani girl. I did what my dad said and became a lawyer. And, of course, hated every second of it. But especially when I moved to Britain and I was sort of, I was there and I wanted to eat my food. And I used to go work in a law firm. And every time I would be craving something masaledar, something, I want something. And I just couldn't find anything, just like you. I just couldn't find anything that would speak of the flavor that I grew up with. And I was more exceedingly getting quite perturbed by the way Pakistan is represented in the West. And I thought, I'm not going to get into the politics, but I'm definitely going to get into the food side of things, because I saw how beautifully connective food is. It's such a great medium to express a culture without being highly controversial. I mean, you can be controversial, but you can definitely pick a non-confrontational sort of side. So I started sort of writing stories about food and growing up in Pakistan and trying to get people to understand that, my story is not just my story, but it's everybody's story. Everyone in Pakistan has a similar story with food. And, as I said in my video, food is our life, even in India, even in Pakistan. It's just exactly what we live for. Every festivity, every gathering, every meeting. And I thought this is something really positive. We never, I was listening to the panel before us, and something that struck me was, we just don't celebrate our culture enough. We always try to hide behind, and especially as a foreign, sort of British or American, desis, we don't really celebrate it enough. Yes, it's changing now. So all these sort of thoughts made me write my books, and it was very hard to sort of sell it as Pakistani food, because every editor, my agent would take it and say, well, every commissioning editor would say, but it's the same thing as Indian.
what are you bringing new to the table? I said, well, this is what I'm bringing, which is new. It may be similar, but it is regionally different. And it has evolved and become a cuisine in its own right. And it just deserves a voice of its own.
Right.
Can I just add one thing? You know, we keep stumbling over this India-Pakistan business. And we can't say it's Indian food when we are talking. We have to say India-Pakistan. Why can't we find a word that includes both? Because the roots of our cooking are the same. They're exactly the same. But somehow when we talk, we stumble, we are embarrassed because we don't know if we've left out the other, then we feel, we should have included the other. So we must get out of it. Somebody come up with a bright idea and tell me what we can say that includes India and Pakistan.
I mean, actually, it's not about India and Pakistan.
It's a subcontinental cuisine.
No, it's not even about that. There is no Indian language. There is no, if you say, when people say, I speak Indian, we laugh. I speak Pakistani, we laugh. But we don't laugh when they say it about food. Because in a way, we know the food we eat, we call Indian food, and I call other food West Indian, or not West Indian Caribbean, but from the west of India.
Right, regional.
Regional.
Yeah.
So I call it Bengali food, or food from Goa, or South Indian food.
Right.
And when they call their food, they call it Indian food, and they call ours from somewhere else. But actually, there is no Indian food, or there is no Pakistan. So when you say there should be one word, there is no all-encompassing food.
One word that includes India and Pakistan, with all our regions.
Yes.
You have Sindhi food, you have other kinds of food, but something that is inclusive. And South Asia is okay, but it's so boring.
Yeah, it's very boring.
I mean, when I would write for like food pieces that were collecting from various different regions, I would tend to use desi, but there's also...
I love the word desi.
I love the word desi personally, but I can see why. I think the broader audience also doesn't know it, which is part of the challenge.
But there are other voices that are not heard. It's still like everything else with food. You said you didn't want to be political, but it is class-oriented, it is politics. Look at the three of us who are sitting here. When I was thinking about what we could talk about that would be different, and one of the things that I thought about, does anyone talk about Dalit cuisine when you talk about? No.
Right.
And even they didn't. What happened when the Brahmins declared the cow sacred, it kind of kept them in business, and it created another layer to an untouchability, and Hindus, Brahmins, Muslims, Christians, and the untouchables. Well, and they also had the added burden of poverty, so they really ate offal, and they ate the cheapest cuts of pork and beef. But they are now reviving their cuisine.
Right.
And so there are other voices of, we talk of street food, but the people who cook those foods in our bastis and in other places, they don't have a voice. And I'm sad that the people who are giving them a voice are often white people who are going there, picking their recipes and writing their books for them. And I think maybe instead of being cross with them, we should be cross with us.
Right.
Because that's easy. And I think that there are those stories. The stories we talk about, we recognize. It's the same story. So in a way, that's boring. And I wonder now, things have changed, Madhur, since I wrote my book, and before that you did yours. Sure. Everyone's a blogger. Everyone's writing. You want a recipe, you just have to look it up. There's Nouvelle Indian cuisine. People are... and I used to resist that because I like more traditional food, but then I'm old. But younger people like that.
No, but I'll stop you there, Sameen. I'm, I don't know, I don't want to suppose this, but I suppose I am a little bit younger than you. I love traditional food. I can't modernize Pakistani or Indian food because I find, I can put a little twist to it, but I don't feel I'm being true to myself. Because I like cooking traditional food.
There are young people writing today, wonderful writers, and they're writing books like Priya Krishna's book, Indianish, and in which it's all sort of Western sandwiches and pizza-based Indian dishes. And it's easy for Westerners to make, easier for them to understand the concept. And I'm sure she'll do very well. And I'm sure more people will cook from her book than perhaps my book.
And I think it's okay.
Yeah, of course it's okay. That's what I'm saying, that it's okay. America will take what America takes to make it American, desi food.
Our names have changed. If someone introduces themselves to me as Khalida, I can't say your name's Khalda. Her name is Khalida.
Right.
And in a few generations, there was a time I used to say, and what does your mother call you? But then I thought, shut your mouth.
No, you're quite right.
Things will change.
Pronunciations completely change. Yeah.
The conversation will change. And I sometimes wonder, we've all written about the food we learned from our mothers and grandmothers. Now, is that a bit passé? I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
It's worth thinking about.
Its place.
It's got its place.
It's got its place,
Right.
and you have to know what things are before you deviate from it. But we have to also allow that deviation and not immediately diss it.
Right.
I think there is an interesting. Went recently to the British Library to speak about a very interesting topic, which was cultural appropriation in food. And this is exactly what it is. One can talk about this, but the thing is, it is going to be culturally appropriated. There will be recipes taken, or ideas or thoughts or ingredients, and then, just blown into this amazing media magnet that will create. But then nobody will look behind the recipe. And so I don't have a problem with people appropriating things, as long as they respect where it's coming from, give it kudos to where the culture is coming from and where that recipe comes from. And for that, books like ours, which are traditional, are sort of books people can research and see, well, that's where it actually comes from.
Why is it appropriation? It's change.
I think it's the misappropriation I have a problem with. It's more when people just try to sell something as something just because they want to use it as a media bait. That's the only problem.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with change. I have a real issue, no problem with change.
Yeah, because things are evolving all the time.
Yeah,
if you
they
look
will.
at the history of Indian food, for example, there was no wheat at one time. There was rice, but no wheat. And wheat came from the Middle East to India. So we also got new things and learned how to use them and made them our own. But every generation does that.
Even in India, as literacy grows and there is television and there is the internet, there was a generation, maybe mine is the last generation, where the only way you learned how to cook was the best food you ate was in people's homes. If we went out to eat Chinese, or we went out to eat Gaylords, to eat chicken Kiev.
Yes,
we didn't go out to eat Indian food.
True.
I remember that chicken Kiev.
But now there are people, and there were no cookery books to cook from. The only way was, like you said, to ask your mum how she did it. But there are books, and there are Indian chefs on television now, just like there are here, and people watch those programs, and young women are cooking differently from them, and not everyone's just looking to their mum. Shame, but...
I know.
Well, I think one other thing that's also interesting, we mentioned blogging, but also the way in which there are other mediums in which cooking is being spread. I mean, video is a huge part of it. I mean, a YouTube video makes a huge difference. And I really liked your point, Sameen, about, underrepresented communities who do not get often a microphone, that it's often privileged folks of families who can, call over and, reestablish their sort of traditions in home, but there's all these other stories. So maybe in some ways, video and passing the mic to those communities is another way of doing it, because getting a book published is very challenging, but us going out into those communities and, sort of capturing that, I think that's also a potential avenue for moving
and lots of good stories there to bring.
Yeah.
They are. I mean, I have to say that, you pointed out a very interesting point, which was about street food. And they're the people who actually create the street food not having a voice. And as you said, Western people go, they take the recipes, they write a book. I think I spent some time in Lahore once, and I actually just took it upon myself to just go to the streets of the different street food areas in Lahore and just talk to people and to the guys who cook the food. And, you just sit there and you think, my goodness, these people have so much knowledge that even my mother doesn't have. Oh, my goodness, I'm so glad she's not here listening to this. But it's just incredible. It's because they have, they have generations behind of doing this kind of cooking and creating these recipes. They put nihari, for example. There's so many techniques and things that it's unbelievable, and they really require a voice, I think. And, this topic was supposed to be about street food, and that's one of the main things I feel is that Lahore especially, and Karachi, where I'm from, definitely has this incredible street food culture with a lot of heritage behind the cooks who cook it. And they do deserve a voice, because I think they're a dying breed as well.
Right. And I think as we all search for stories to write and different stories to write, we find, it is amazing what you can find, but it's also in your point of view, what you are bringing to the story, what associations you have with certain things. I remember I was in Pakistan, a guest of Razi's family actually, and I said I wanted to go to the Northwest Frontier, and they arranged it, but I had to have a military escort. So there was military in front of me, military in back of me, and I was going to go to the border of Afghanistan. So it was all very dangerous, and they were very worried, and then, you know, we had machine guns and everything. And we got to the border, or near the border, and we came across a little shop that was making chapli kebab. Now, I wanted the recipe of chapli kebab so badly, and I wanted to write my own story, so I wanted to see it being cooked right there. So I said, I'll come back. We have to go to the border, but I'll come back and watch you make some chapli kebabs. So we got to the border, and they were just closing. There were some people coming in blue burqas from Afghanistan, and they were just closing the gate when there was a rush of something happened on the other side, and a rush of people came in and started pushing the gate and coming in, and there was mayhem, and our escort said, let's go, get into your cars, let's go. And I was in the middle, there was escort before me and escort after me, and we started going back. I said, please, can we stop here? I need to get the recipe for chapli kebab here. So they wouldn't stop. I said, no, please, and I jumped out. And I said, I've got to go. So I went there, and these people are all waiting, their guns ready, and I said, please, can you make me some chapli kebab? And he did, and I watched the process. I watched the tilted pan, the oil at the the fat. It was dumba fat. Flowing to the bottom, and him making the kebabs with a little chopped tomato in between, and green chilies, and sabut dhania inside. And it was just, that recipe was my story of the day. And I wrote about it. And of course, they kept saying, hurry up, and finally we moved on. And it was a wonderful day for me, for my story. And this is what happens to writers. These things, you come across them, and you can't stop but absorb it and take it in and write about it.
No, absolutely. And I think I agree with you. And I think as a writer, especially one which is about food, especially exploring, I have to say that when I lived in Pakistan, I never really appreciated the rest of the country. Never really bothered to travel very much, except to like maybe Lahore or Islamabad. But then when I left and I started to write and research for future books, I sort of said to my parents, that's it, I'm going to Chitral, I'm going to Hunza, I'm going to go and explore. I was like, that's horrible food. You know, us Pakistanis, we don't actually appreciate what we have. And I said, no, it's absolutely wonderful. It sounds so different from the rest of the country. And I don't think that's a region that's never got a voice. So I went and spent some time in Chitral a couple of years ago, and then I'm going up to actually doing a food tour to Hunza and Baltistan next year from London. And the whole idea was to show how abundant these areas are with natural produce that doesn't get sent to the rest of the country. So we have an abundance of buckwheat. We obviously have a Hunza apricots that come, but then there's incredible grains, millet we were talking about, and we don't eat it. We don't even celebrate. I mean, we can talk about recipe books and cooking, but what about the produce of Pakistan? Within Pakistan, there's not enough use of what's available.
You're right. You know, one of the things that I noticed that's really different about Pakistani food, and we noticed when we came to Pakistan from India, everybody just eats meat. If you eat palak, you put meat. If you eat shaljam, you put meat. And so what you're talking about, produce, and I was struck because when my children were young and I took them, we went to actually Bangladesh, and the man came around with hens on his head, and they played with those hens in the courtyard, and they had no connection between that and what was on their table at lunch, and they would not have eaten it if they had. I mean, there's a writer, Alice B. Toklas, an American writer who wrote in Paris, 1954, her cookery book. And she talked about the horrors of the kitchen, all this pleasant food that we talk about, and how she had to learn to smother a carp and stab a duck, and all the stuff that she says that she would never, ever want to do. And after that, she gives you the most wonderful recipe. But it really is like that. I mean, friends of mine, I'm not there now, tell me around Bakr Eid how the cities stink of meat. And so really, this is a plea to everyone that we really need to start eating vegetables for their own sake, not to stuff meat and everything.
I think that the whole the meat adding to vegetables. The meat adding to vegetables. I mean, I grew up. My dad was from Uttar Pradesh. My mom was from Jabalpur, so she had sort of like different kind of cooking techniques when they came in. And I think one of the very specific things my mom always said, having Punjabi roots, was that we always add meat to vegetables. We never can cook a vegetable on its own. Unlike the northern Indians who know how to cook sabzi really well. And so we've sort of and if you go to the northern parts of Pakistan, although they eat a lot of dumba, like you said, a lot of animal fat, because that keeps, that gives them the heat that they need in harsh climates. But they eat incredible vegetables. Yeah. And simple, really, really simple. And one of the things I learned in Chitral, a beautiful recipe that I think has Central Asian roots somewhere, was a beautiful bean dish made out of black-eyed beans and an incredibly creamy topping of walnuts and tomatoes mixed in cream with a lovely topping.
Wonderful.
And it's tempered with walnut oil and onions. So, it's just amazing.
I want that.
Let me get that in my next book.
I just want to tell you one more thing about Sumayya. She is taking a group of people to this Hansa area. So anyone who wants to sign up should sign up.
I want
to go. and go with her. The other thing is that I was in the Khyber Pass area on I don't know if it was Wednesday or Tuesday, one of the non-meat days.
Meatless day.
And so they were cooking lunch for me and I was taking notes, and it was all a fabulous kind of fortress that they lived in.
But non-meat days, they cook chicken.
No, it doesn't mean not this household. So they made something fantastic. They made tinda. I don't know if you know what tinda is. It's, all of you know?
Yes.
Those of you don't know, it's of a squash, it's of a green squash type of family. And it's that's enough. It's round.
Yeah.
It's round.
We got
it's round. And you cut it and you cook it with tomatoes and spices and things like that. So they made that, and with it there was a kind of bread made in a tandoor-like oven, but it was wheat grown in their own area. And that was the sweetest, best wheat I've eaten. And this was the tastiest. I forget what they called the bread. They didn't call it a naan. It was superb. I could have that bread and those tindas all the time because they were wonderful. They were wonderful. And that was a meatless day. But not everyone observed it in Pakistan, I noticed. Right. But these people did.
I think we're probably whipping our audience into a hungry frenzy. I can hear them talking back. I've just been so blessed to be a fly on the wall in this conversation. I think food is an amazing conversation, and I loved hearing you guys talk about it. But I would also like to open it up to the audience, because it sounds like there are some questions. Do we have some microphones where people can ask questions? If you raise your hands, please keep them short, more questions than comments, and we can have more of this super entertaining conversation.
Thank you. My name is Khalid Rahman. In the diaspora, like in New York, are the Pakistani chefs from the back home creating fusion dishes, taking, say, turkey or asparagus and things like that, which are not seen in Pakistan, and creating dishes which have a fusion taste with spices and so forth? Do you know, as a writer? Or
you live in America. I don't live here, so I don't know how much it's happening. But one of the most interesting fusion restaurants that I ate in recently in London, and for the first time, because I also am quite purist about, but this fusion was fusion of different parts of the subcontinent fusing with each other. And that food was really interesting. So you don't have to look at fusion with the West. You can fuse with South Indian food, elements of, and it was
I'm
fabulous.
Always doing that myself.
I do too.
Began to love curry patta. And grow up with curry patta, now I put it in my dal, which I normally in Delhi you would not do. Yeah. So you begin to love certain things and certain flavors, and you add them to whatever you're making. So I think Indians they're watching so much television and food shows, they are fusing a lot of their food, but the pure form you know where to get when it exists. And every now and then you go to a certain part of India and you say, I know nothing about this food. Yeah. I remember going to Coorg, and which is in southern India, north of Kerala. And the food was something I'd never eaten. They eat a lot of mushrooms from their forests. They do a lot of hunting, so they eat meat. But they have different kinds of rice noodles that they make themselves that I've not seen anywhere before. They have also kind of rice balls that they steam that I've never seen anywhere before. So it's a different, altogether different cuisine, and you can go into pockets of certainly India, and I'm sure that's true of Pakistan, where you'll see things that you've never seen before. And that's a very exciting kind of adventure still left to be.
Yeah, but that's what I meant about the voices that are not heard. I know we're all women on this panel, but often it's third world women whose voices are not heard, who are cooking those foods.
I mean, it's something you said about the fusion element. I think one thing that I've started to do, I'm based now, I used to be in London, now I'm based in Scotland, which is blessed with some incredible produce, really wonderful produce. And I started to feel that, and this is me being environmentally conscious and a little bit more eco-conscious, is that, do I have to use vegetables and things that have done so many air miles? Why don't I start incorporating local produce?
Absolutely.
So I've used a lot of local produce in creating Pakistani things. So, just sort of, I can't get bhindi. I know bhindi's done lots of miles, right? So I'll use something that's local. Something it was a revelation for me was that, we have so much rhubarb. I have a lot of rhubarb in my garden.
I do too, yeah.
I've started to make rhubarb chutney instead of tamarind chutney.
Perfect.
Because it's it's got that tartness and it's easy to sort of balance with chaat masala and stuff like that. I make avocado chaat and, there's so many things you can do, but that's not me trying to be fusing, it's just me because I've got it
that's
there.
a really good point, which really answers the question, the gentleman, I can't see anyone with these lights, but asked about whether American cooks are using local produce, and I think that is where people must begin to do that, because you're right about the bhindi having done the miles.
I grow all my own vegetables. They're only there for 4 or 5 months in the summer.
Yeah.
But in the summer, we're eating our own organic
And the concept of eating what's in season and not expecting everything to always be available.
Yes. Something we grow up with.
You can always cheat. And I cheat with bhindi okra. I cheat all the time because I don't grow it. I can't grow the numbers that I need. I will buy it from the market. I don't care if it's organic. I just love bhindi. So you're allowed to cheat.
You can.
But on the whole, I think you should try.
For bhindi, I would cheat.
Yeah, bhindi is one of those things you make an exception for.
Yeah. Do we have other questions? Yeah, I have one question. Yes, right here. Well, can we get the microphone around to her, please? In the front.
I wanted to ask, there's a huge difference in the level of quality Indo-Pakistan cuisine which is produced in London and in New York. Literally, it's like day and night. I mean, the quality is just outstanding. Now I just go to London to eat food rather than, kind of anything else. And it's going back to some of your comments, like this restaurant, which is Dishum in London, has become so popular that it serves from 7 a.m. till 1 o'clock at night. So there is a huge, I can see, and 50% of the people are foreigners or more over there. So why has our cuisine not been accepted here? And there's so much of a difference, and it is not appreciated as it is over there in London, if I could get some comments.
I think London's had a longer history with it, perhaps, is one reason. And also, there is that element of racism that meant that Indian food needs always to be very cheap. So people were not willing to spend a lot of money when you ate out Indian food, and now I think that's changing. There are some very upmarket Indian restaurants where the quality of the ingredients as well as the quality of the cooking is better. But on the whole, what's still being sold in supermarkets as ready meals are as appalling as when I first came here. I don't know why it's allowed. Takeaways, the qualities. So most people are still not eating good food. But I think there is that. People were not willing to pay. And I think maybe that America is still getting to that stage with Indian food where you accept that this is a cuisine. It's like Chinese. People want cheap Chinese food. Have an Indian. My daughter came home and said, "What's an Indian?" My friends are going out to eat an Indian. She was little.
I think it's also because generally I would say this for London more than the rest of England. England's London's in the last 20 years has seen this strange, excited, trend-based cooking and eating out. So there, suddenly you have a trend. The new trend is Middle Eastern food. Everyone's going nuts for Middle Eastern food, although it's been there for centuries. They don't call it Irani, they'll call it Persian because it sounds so much more regal. And then Pakistani and Indian food, again, it's like, we have to go to this nouvelle cuisine Indian restaurant. No, it's changing. They're trying to start understand little, and I think it's because England is smaller than, say, New York. London is smaller than New York. And I think all the little communities are a little bit more close-knit. And there are less of them.
Right.
But I have to tell you, I went in your town, Glasgow. I went because I heard so much about it. Is chips served with curry sauce? And I wanted to have a record in my own head and my book about what chips with curry sauce are. So we walk into this little chippy, or whatever they're called.
Chippy.
And there's, the usual counter, smell of fat, and the manager's Turkish now. So the Turkish manager gets me. We have cameras. BBC is following me. So we are taking all this down. And he gets me this chips with curry sauce. I eat it. It's tolerable. I mean, it's not awful, but it's near awful. So then I say, okay, this is very popular in Glasgow. Let's find out a little more about it. I said, can you show me how you make it? He said, well, come into my office. So I said, all right, I'll come into your office. So he had a big tin sitting on the shelf, and he had like a shovel. And he went and took out so many scoops of this powder, yellowish powder, put it into a bucket on the floor. He had a kettle for boiling water. He boiled the water electrically, then poured a measure in, and then he did bzzz, and the whole thing became a sauce. So I said, but I thought, let me look at the tin and see what it says. It said, curry sauce made in China. So that's what is being eaten in the fast food shops in your town.
It is. And pakoras, haggis pakoras.
Haggis pakoras.
Haggis
pakoras.
But
haggis
pakoras take the cake.
I've tried all of those things, and the haggis came from a tin. Now, haggis can be wonderful if it's really made, as you know.
Yes.
Good haggis.
From lamb offal.
But they take it from the tin.
Because it has to be cheap. If it's Indian, it has to be cheap.
Yes.
So it has to come out of the tin.
So we have time for one more question. Let's do the final question, and then we can say thank you to our panelists. Go ahead.
You asked the hard questions, I remember.
I'm just going to take you back in time. You write in English. Your cookbooks are in English, but there's a cookbook that I've heard about from my grandmother named Razia Ka Dastarkhan. And Razia Ka Dastarkhan, Madhur, you grew up in Delhi. You may have read it in Urdu, or you may have read it in Hindi or English. It's a cultural icon of sorts.
Right.
New brides were given it as they headed over to their husbands. What impact has it had on the cultural cuisine of the Desi cultural cuisine?
I have not read that.
I haven't either. So I can't speak
Read
at all.
it, but just the word Dastarkhan tells me it's coming from a North Indian background.
I've read lots of books on Lucknowi.
It's coming from
of various
Maybe it's worth
sorts.
talking about the hospitality.
I think it's a shame. I think it's what happened with language. It's like, in the panel before, people were talking about Urdu, but it's elitism. And I think that was Pakistan got into trouble. Urdu became a national language. They did the same. We come from a subcontinent. Everyone spoke a language. We spoke something. We all understood each other. And suddenly we don't understand each other because one went into Persian and one went into another. And also in script. It had to be written in different scripts. Right. And I think there's become a kind of pan-Indian and a pan-Pakistani cuisine. And all of that is North Indian. And all of that is influenced a little bit, but there hasn't been the same respect paid to the regional cuisines. I know some have done really well. The Vindalus have got known, and the dosas have got known.
Right.
And Bengalis are known for their fish, but it hasn't got that kind of that global acceptance that what came from the Mughals, because, and we were guilty of that. Our curry houses also kind of traded on flock wallpaper and and Mughal kings who cook your biryani by candlelight, Slow cooker will do.
I think one of the saddest things... Sorry.
So go, I'll finish. I'm done.
No, you finish. I'm sorry.
Go.
Okay, go.
Mother, why don't you go?
I think one of the saddest things that's happened in India is that we have lost Urdu. It is one of my saddest... if I can list the sad things that have happened in my life, I would say that's one of them. And so somebody should at least translate that into English. But I haven't seen it.
It has been.
I have not seen it. Oh, really? Okay, I must look for it.
So we have some reading for
So what is the English title?
Dastarkhan.
Razia Ka Dastarkhan. Okay.
Sounds really good.
Okay.
Can I just add... sorry, Madhur.
No, I'm finished.
I just want to say this little small thing about Pakistan, just before we sort of end. That I think that it's all very well to sit up here and sort of talk about the differences and the similarities, but I think it's time to sort of also celebrate. Obviously, 1947 changed the countries, sadly, and in some ways, in good ways as well. Not thinking about the political sides, but I think that if we talk about food, I think I'm not saying anymore.
It's a very difficult subject.
It's a very difficult. It is. But if it doesn't affect me so much, but I think as a Pakistani, I feel that as geographically and politically we do divide sometimes, it changes food, and this is for many, many parts of the world. Where historically places have changed and the food has changed. I think it's time to do something which is to celebrate every region of the country.
Yeah.
Because I think it doesn't get a voice. The people don't get a voice. And I think that this is what I have experienced this is why I'm so passionate about the north of Pakistan, because I think that these are people that do lack a voice. And there are some incredible cuisines, very driven by produce, but can be replicated. And they should be given a voice. And I think it's time to sort of celebrate those regions of the country.
In India, we do have them.
Yes,
we do have lots of regional cuisines, tons and tons of books on regional cuisines. They're not always written well. You see, a cookbook has to be written well for it to be used by more than people who know all the measurements and words and languages that are in there. For example, the same vegetable will be called by a different name, a name you don't know. The dal will be called by another name, you don't know that name. The measurements are local measurements, and they'll say a glass full of this. What glass? What are you talking about? So these things don't translate except to locals, and because they've seen it being made, they can do it. But in India, they do exist, and it takes someone to sit with the people and do the measurements and and say, oh, you mean red lentils, or you mean moong dal, because they're calling it something else. So it needs that kind of person who's written cookbooks in a proper way that can sell to the majority of the people who understand the terms. It's taken us a lot of time to make people understand what moong dal is and how it is different from masoor dal. And so that needs to be done in all the regional books as well.
So, I'm sorry, I could sit here and listen to this all day, but we have to move on to the next panel. All their cookbooks...
May I just one short comment?
I'm sorry, no, we have another panel after this that we have to get to, and I want to respect their time. I'm so sorry. But all their books are available outside for purchase. Please support their work, and big thanks to the Lahore Literary Festival for putting this on. Let's give a round of applause for our panel.